I've been calling God and I've been emailing him and he never answers.
Do you have an appointment with him?
What? I need an appointment? He said I could come by any time.
When was the last time that you took the time to actually spend some time with him?
It was recently.
Uh-huh.
I don't recall the date, but I was there for the whole meeting.
Okay, hold on. Let me look at a few things here. Yes, I see. It says here you were chatting in the hallway half of the meeting, and then the doodle you made on the visitor's card, that was actually quite impressive. It looked like the Mona Lisa here. We see.
Nobody's perfect.
Look, I'm sorry that you feel that way, but right now God is busy attending some more loyal members, and he'll get to you as soon as he can. Just, you don't really need to worry about waiting here or calling or messaging us. We'll call you, all right? Thank you.
Can I have an applause for my young actors? Wouldn't it suck if it was like that? That would be very, very depressing life of a Christian if this would be the way to go. But, it happened. It really did happen. Not once, it happened several times. But before we get into the story, let me share this real quick with you. So I just remember them being really tall, like towering above my head, and they're huge, and they're lights, and I'm looking around, and I can see my mom, and I start crying. I got lost in that store. How many of you? Yeah, everybody had that experience where, and that's so interesting. Like when I walked through that store, it's back home, but I remember when I walked through there, I'm in the shadow like this, but I remember that was so traumatic and horrible when you feel left alone, when you feel so scared, so fragile. Mom is not there to protect you, and it's a really, really horrible experience that we remember for the rest of our lives. And we know when we read the Bible that the Bible says that God will never abandon us. Even if mother forgets her own child, I won't forget you, he says. So we don't really have to guess if God is there or not in our lives. It's scary enough just to think that this skit would be real, but it happened. It really did happen. And Bible tells us how that looked like. And sometimes when I read the New Testament, you read the stories about the apostles and everything, and I'm like, oh, poor guys, they're like guinea pigs for the whole universe. Like they're like figuring things out, and then we are like, he sucked over there. Yeah, that was bad. And, we feel, actually, at least I feel relieved. Okay, I'm so happy I didn't have to go through some of that stuff that they went through. And learning on their mistakes is much easier than learning on my own. So, what I want us to learn today from opening the Bible is, first of all, how does it feel when God is really on a vacation from us? How does it feel and how does it affect our life when there is a lack of His presence in our life? The reason why I say that is because, right now it's still I guess it's a nice day, and then people go out there and they forget the church because the mountains are much more interesting than the church. I can't wait for like the colder days to come and a little bit more of snow, then these pews get filled up. But the thing is, we take a vacation from God. Because the summer is awesome and we're doing stuff and there's a whole bunch of things happening, and we just take a vacation. And that was really interesting. I remember, like, a long time ago again, we were on a vacation, and we were in a church, and there was one guy sitting over there, and over there in those old days, the Sabbath school would be held in here. So pews would be kind of separated, and then teachers would be standing, and then it would be like a holy noise for an hour. But I remember one guy saying he's sitting in there, and he has no clue what we are talking about because we are reading the quarterly lesson. And he's like, well, I'm on a vacation. You know, I didn't read it, I'm on a vacation. And that's when this idea popped up for the first time. That's some 20 years ago. The thing is, when we take a vacation from God, God also takes a vacation from us. And there are two major demons that pop in, that just barge into our life, push themselves through, and when they take over, our life gets really, really screwed up. Today I want us to talk about that. So, let's open Matthew chapter 14. This is where the story starts. This is where the first story starts of God taking a vacation. So, before we read the verse, let me just give a background. So, actually no, let's read the verse, never mind. 14:22. Bless you. Immediately after this, Jesus insisted that his disciples get back into the boat and cross to the other side of the lake while he sent the people home. And after sending them home, he went up into the hills by himself to pray, and night fell while he was there alone. So, this verse describes Jesus taking a vacation from his disciples. And why would he do that? I mean, when you read the Bible, he would take them anywhere with him. He would use every single opportunity he had to teach them stuff. Why would he do that? If we look at the chapter, if we look actually at the story before, here's what happens. Jesus is doing miraculous things. He is healing people, and then just before this happened, that day, before this evening, he feeds 5,000 people. And people are excited. Imagine multitudes of people being excited about this guy. He is the one. Now, anytime somebody shows up like Jesus, there are always people who want to use that. And Jesus didn't allow to be a puppet of political interests of some people who were present over there. Because what Bible says is that Jesus realized that they wanted to forcefully pronounce him the King of Jews. And he didn't want to allow that. So, the verse is pretty brutal. Jesus barely ever insisted on stuff. But over here, Matthew says, Matthew was there. He witnessed that. I can imagine Jesus insisting. I mean, just imagine them excited. This is the time. This is the perfect opportunity to announce him the king, to take over the kingdom, to get rid of the Romans, to get our freedom. I can imagine the stories talked around, bouncing in their heads. Imagine Jesus ditching them all. You get in the boat and leave now. But Jesus, read my lips. In the boat, leave now. I don't want to discuss it. Go. That should be really scary, you know. Imagine like God of love not being so loving for a second. But if he insisted, obviously they didn't want to comply the first time, so he had to insist. Eventually, they're like, okay, dude, okay, we're leaving. You know? So they get in the boat and leave, and Jesus dismisses the people, and he goes up into the mountain. Now, Jesus was a human too, and he needed a break. And Bible says that he would quite often take the time off. When everybody was asleep, he would wake up early in the morning, go to the mountain to pray. This time, he couldn't wait for the morning. This time, he had to go right away. And I can understand why. You know, he knew what his mission was. He came to save the people. And he understood, I'm pretty sure that he was aware also that this was, if he decided to be the king right now, the nation would embrace him momentarily. They would actually do things. But then he knew that that was not what he was called for. Because him leaving like that on a sudden notice to have a prayer with his Father, even Jesus was dismayed with this situation. But the matter of fact is, he is taking a vacation from his disciples. What happens to them? What Bible says it happened to them when this occurred? Now we come to the interesting part. So let's read verse 24. Meanwhile, the disciples were in trouble far away from land, for a strong wind has risen, and they were fighting heavy waves. So, we see the disciples on their own turf struggling. They were fishermen. Most of them were fishermen. Not all of them, but most of them were fishermen. And all of them were very familiar with boats, paddling, storms, and all that stuff. They lived on the coast of a big lake. So this was nothing new to them. But Bible says, Matthew probably didn't have that much experience, but still, he sees this situation as a really bad thing because they were fighting heavy waves, they were in trouble, they were freaking out. And now, about 3 o'clock in the morning, verse 25 says, Jesus came toward them walking on the water. When the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified. In their fear, they cried out, "It's a ghost!" But Jesus spoke to them at once. "Don't be afraid," he says. "Take courage, I am here." What is the first response in their life when God takes a vacation from them? Fear. Fear is the first thing that strikes us when we realize that circumstances of our life are greater than us and that there is nobody there who is greater than our circumstances. So, when Bryce gets in trouble, he calls for his dad because his dad is big enough to deal with his circumstances. But when his dad gets in trouble, he needs to find somebody really big to deal with the circumstances that are that big. He called the mayor Hickenlooper. Hickenlooper calls Obama. When God takes a vacation from us and we run into these circumstances, fear strikes us. And here is why. Here is another reason. So God is really cool. Sometimes he will leave us alone because we're stubborn, just as he did with his disciples, but he couldn't wait until the morning. He couldn't, Jesus could have really chosen he could have sat in a boat and just paddle fast, Jesus fast, woo, and he catches up to them, but he didn't. He decides to do something crazy. He decides to walk on water. Seriously, what would you do if you saw somebody walking on water? No wonder they freaked out. But the problem here is that fear kicked in before. Their fear was already there when they saw God approaching them. And now that demon took over, and now that demon of fear is shaping their decisions, and that demon of fear is shaping how they perceive God Himself. So, just because God didn't take their approach into getting there, just because God didn't do things in a conventional way, they couldn't see Him. And they started freaking out. It's a ghost. Even though the Bible tells us there is no ghost. But they still yeah. It is kind of a scary situation, but still, if they were not... here's the thing. All of you watch horror movies, right? Occasionally. Some of you more than occasionally. But when we watch horror movies, so that's like 1.5 hours, 2 hours, depending on which one you choose, and it's usually, of course, in the evening. So the movie is done, and you turn off the TV, and then suddenly it's so quiet, and you're walking up the stairs, and you start seeing shadows, you start hearing things, you start Why? Because your mind was shaped with that hour and a half or 2 hours that you spent in that way, and right now you see that in reality. So that's what the fear brought them also. God came back from a vacation, stepped into their life, but they didn't see him. Fear took over. The only reason fear took over is because God was away. First lesson, don't think that you can deal with this life by yourself. Some of us are stronger, some of us are weaker. Some of us wimp when we break a nail. Some of us stay tough when Hurricane Sandy hits. I mean, we're all different. But this life is much, much, much bigger than all of us. And there is a moment for everybody that we can handle. Let me finish the story. So, what happens? Peter sees, and Peter, blah, blah, you know Peter, blah. His tongue much faster than his brains. If that's really you call me to walk to you. Obviously, there is doubt in his words. If that is really you. So he doubts. And Jesus tells me, come on. Yeah, come on. You know me. Come on. So, I mean, I still, anytime I read about this story, I can, what was he thinking? Seriously. He dared to get his feet across that boat, and he stands on water, and he starts walking on water. But here's the problem. Once God takes a vacation, and once the demon of fear takes over, it's not that easy to get rid of it. Because Peter walks on water. I mean, hey, walking on water, what else do I need to say? Nothing. I mean, walking on water, that's plenty enough of justification that God is right there with him. But then he sees the waves. And the waves are big. And maybe the waves got in between him and Jesus, and for a second he didn't see Jesus. But here's the thing. Once we send God on a vacation, and maybe even unknowingly this fear moves in, we get into troubles. Even if God is right there showing us his power in things that are happening, fear is not going to let us go. Not immediately. So Peter starts sinking. And he cries momentarily, Jesus, help me! Jesus was really cool. He didn't wait. Bible says he was right there over there grabbing his hands, and he pulls him out. So he had to feel the touch of God to take the fear away. That's a lot. That's a lot that God has to do to relieve us from our fear. And what Jesus says in the end. Verse 31. Jesus immediately reached out and grabbed him. You have so little faith, Jesus said. Why did you doubt me? I can hear the disappointment in the voice of Jesus. I mean, you know me, Peter. We've been hanging around for so long. You know me. You should have known better. Why did you doubt me? Thank you for rubbing it in, Jesus. I can hear Peter's thoughts. But lesson learned. For Peter, I hope for us. When God takes a vacation, fear kicks in, and fear brings a lack of faith. So guys, all of you experienced fear. All of us experienced fear because we needed God at some point of our life. Something bad happened. Either it's an illness, or it's a loss of job, loss of family, anything that causes us big stuff. You know the big stuff. Destroyed relationships, destroyed future, crushed hopes and dreams. All of us went through that. And we experience fear. And the fear is because we don't know what's going to happen in my next step. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Now, Bible tells me, don't be afraid, God is there with you. But my fear is telling me, where is God? You see what's happening to you? Are you sure that God is? Are you really sure? Are you really, really, really sure that God is there? That's what fear is telling, right? That's what fear does. And they were like, that is the lack of faith that moves in. If God never took a vacation, none of this stuff would ever happen. So, why did Jesus take a vacation from his students? It's very simple. If we go back to the story, it's this. So, Jesus has his agenda. His disciples and the crowd had a different agenda. And now, in the moment of those two agendas colliding, his disciples were stubborn. This is how it's supposed to be. This is what's supposed to happen. This is what we want, God. This is what I need in my life, God, right now. If you don't let this happen in my life, I'm really not even sure if you exist anymore. I don't know if you're there. You know what? If you don't do me this favor, I don't know. I'll probably take a break from church, or I'll stop giving my tithe, or I'll stop praying. If you don't do it my way, God, is what brought God to dump them for a little bit, just so they can see how does a life look like when you take it your own way. My dear friends, we all have our ideas how life is supposed to look like. And God has his idea how our life is supposed to look like. We can collide. But if we keep on pushing our own agenda, he will have to leave, because we are not leaving him any room. What is your agenda? And does your agenda fit with his agenda? Let's talk about the other demon. This one is even worse. This one is really even worse, because this one, it's almost impossible to get rid of him. Mark chapter 9. Mark chapter 9. Let's start reading from verse 14. So, before the event that we are about to read, what happened was that Jesus picks a couple of his students and he takes them to the mountain. Like a prayer meeting, small retreat for a couple of his closest ones. And guess who was the guest speaker? First they had Moses, then they had Elijah. I'm pretty sure they were excited. The mountain transfiguration happens. So Jesus over there shows his real appearance. Bible says he looked like a bright light. He was levitating in the air, talking to Moses and Elijah, and his students were like, wow, God is right here. But Jesus takes a vacation from his other students. He lets his other disciples deal with stuff. And let's see how that ended up. So Mark chapter 9, verse 14. When they returned to the other disciples, they saw a large crowd surrounding them, and some teachers of religious law were arguing with them. When the crowd saw Jesus, they were overwhelming awe, and they ran to greet him. What is it all this arguing about? Jesus asked. And I can imagine that. I can see that happening. Like Jesus, he sees his disciples over there, and suddenly he sees like angry faces. He sees teachers of the law yelling at them and everything. And Jesus is like, who's dealing with my kids? Don't touch my babies. What's this all arguing about? So, what are they arguing about? They are arguing about a failure. Do you remember what happened in the rest of the story? So the father comes there with a possessed son, and he says, Jesus, please, I brought my son to your disciples so they can cast this evil spirit from him, and they couldn't do it. Can you please do something for him, please? And Jesus is asking him, what do you mean if I can do something? You know what? Everything is possible for somebody who believes. I would hate to be in shoes of that father. I mean, he just witnessed an evil spirit overcoming the power that these disciples had. And he heard stories of other demons being cast out, and he's like, there's no hope for my son. This demon is much stronger than, what am I going to do? So Jesus comes up, and of course he has doubts. Of course he has doubts in God because of people representing God sucked at what they were doing. So Jesus is trying to teach a lesson, and he says, if you have faith, everything is possible. And then this father says something amazing, and I love that part. He says, I believe, Jesus, please help my lack of belief. I mean, that's as honest as one can say it. And of course, Jesus is too merciful not to do it. So he, pretty much, Bible says, he steps in, he casts out the demon, and story done. Father is happy. His disciples are like in the background, like, are we leaving now? Let's go. You know, let's go. Bye. Because Bible says that they left right away. Obviously, they didn't feel really too comfortable being embarrassed like that. But what is disturbing here is the words of Jesus that were directed not to the people around here, but to his disciples. And the words are written in verse 19. Sorry. Jesus said to them, you faithless people, how long must I be with you? How long must I put up with you? Bring that boy to me. I said, imagine how horrible that is. Just a few hours before that, he was up there on the gateway of heaven, talking to Moses and Elijah, realizing what he gave up for these guys over here, and now he walks down there, and they're an utter failure. Yeah, he was disturbed. And his words reveal that he was disturbed. Now, the question is, why did Jesus take a vacation from his students this time? What did they do now? And that is revealed in the text a little bit later. Let's read verse 33, the same chapter. So they left to Capernaum, and now they get over there. So after they arrived at Capernaum and settled in a house, Jesus asked his disciples, what were you discussing out on the road? But they didn't answer. Now, let's for a second picture this story. So I would assume they were walking. At that time, of course, everybody was walking. They couldn't afford a Ferrari or a mule. They had Toyotas, sandals. So they were just walking. And now, so there is like 12 of his disciples and Jesus. And tell me, how do you imagine this? How come that Jesus doesn't know what were they arguing about? What were they discussing on the road? How come they don't know? He doesn't know if they're walking together. Luke describes that in one of the other stories. Luke says the disciples, while they were walking, disciples fell behind Jesus so they can discuss. So they let Jesus, go, Jesus, yeah, we'll catch up. I just need to tie my sandal. Yeah. And all 11 of them will help me. We'll catch up. So Jesus walks away just enough so he cannot hear them, and then they start discussing. How ridiculous was that? Seriously, hey, they're walking for hours with Jesus, and he's by himself, like they ditched me. And how would Jesus feel? Seriously, they ditched him because they have some important thing to talk that he's not supposed to hear about. What were they discussing? Because they had been arguing, verse 34, about which of them was the greatest. This is not an argument that started after they walked. This is an argument that screwed them up when Jesus left them on their own. And that is the second demon, my friends. That is me. That is us. That is our ego. That is our arrogance. iPhone. Why? Because it's mine. It's me. I am the important one. When God is not around, the only thing we have is I. So, when we send God on a vacation, fear is not the only one that takes over. I take over. I am the most important. I am the center. Everything revolves around me. And our ego is constantly fighting for attention. Now, let's clarify. I don't think that is anything bad. Because self-confidence is really the key of success, not just in this country, but anywhere. If you don't have confidence in yourself and your capabilities, if you're constantly second-guessing yourself, your life is really not going to be that fun. But if you're confident in your capabilities, if you know what you want, if you know where you want to get, yeah, that will keep you going. But if that is not bad, what is bad then? What is bad? Here's the difference, guys. We live a life. After this worship service, we are going to have our lunch and we're going to go back to our normal lives. And the question is, after we leave, after we start making plans, after we start taking action, who is really on the steering wheel of our life? If we don't rely on God, then we have to rely on ourselves. And that works awesome as long as whatever we are dealing with is 6'1", 6'1.5". When it gets to 6'2", well, then it's gonna be hard for me to deal with it. When it gets to 10'5", then I'm screwed. And that's the way this life is, because no wonder the result was lack of faith for these disciples who failed to cast this demon out, because they thought that they're doing the stuff. We're good. Don't you worry. No, Dad, chill. Just sit down. We'll take care of this. Yeah, you're good. Yeah, we'll take care. And then when it didn't happen, is when they realized that this is something greater than them. One of the famous Satanists, Aleister Crowley, wrote in one of his books, he says that he was shown a Satan as a mighty person, and all of the people of this world were shown to him as little pawns on a table, and he was moving them however he wanted. I have no doubts that what he saw was true. Satan is much, much bigger than us, much, much stronger than us, and we don't stand a chance. But here's the thing. If demon of fear is here, and if demon of ego is here, all I'm going to see is Satan moving me wherever he feels like. Now, as I said, the stories that we read are old stories. Jesus was present in his body and he didn't have much of a choice about being here and there. He had to be in one place. Right now, that's not the fact. He sent his Holy Spirit to be here with us, and he is present in our lives 24/7. Every single day in a week, he is over there for us. So the days of Jesus literally taking a vacation are gone. But today the question is not whether God is going to take a vacation from us. The question is, are you going to kick him on a vacation occasionally when you need to do some things? I remember an old argument, and it's interesting. I realize how old I am when I start sharing the stories when I was young. And that's kind of depressing too. But again, that same old pastor that I mentioned in the beginning, actually no, I mentioned, I'm getting old, seriously. I was sharing a story over there in the youth this morning. Anyways, I'm young. I'm with one old pastor, and there is one guy who was a little bit older than me. He was a college student, and he's trying to convince me that Christian life and church and all of that stuff is just a bunch of baloney, that I should just live my life the way I normally. So, and he also grew up as a Christian, and he stopped attending church. And then the argument was mostly between him and the pastor, and I was just a spectator. And at one moment, I both of them are losing their patience, and but they're still decent. And then in one moment, this young man explodes. You know what, Pastor? Do you want me to tell you why I stopped attending church? He explodes. And then the pastor explodes too. I know why you left church, so you can do whatever you want. And I remember this guy, he was like, and then the argument continued. And recently I saw that I saw this conversation in one movie, and it reminded me of this. And it's interesting why we send God on a vacation, first class ticket to wherever you want to go, just for a few days, because we want to do things our own way. We just want to do things how we want to do things, and we're going to do them. And then later on, we are going to pray and ask God to come back, and God will be back. But have one thing in mind. Once we send him on a vacation, fear will kick in, ego will kick in, and they are not going to leave that easy. My last story, one more minute, and we are wrapping up our worship service. You remember when Jesus says, when a demon is cast out of a person, where does that demon go? He goes wandering through the deserted places, looking for a place to stay. And then demon says to himself, you know what, I'll just go check out my old crib. Let's see how did that work out. And then Jesus says, if the demon comes back and he finds this place vacant, what will he do? Huh? He'll bring, guys, party at my place. He brings 7 demons worse than him, and they all move into that person, and that person ends up being much worse than it was in the beginning. What does that mean? God can chase out demons from us. But if we don't make sure that God lives in us every single day of the week, every single week of the month, every single month of the year, if we don't make sure that God is still there, they will come back. They will eat us alive. Some of you are too young to experience that. Some of you know very well what I'm talking about. So, don't send God on a vacation. Don't tell him, let me do it my own way. Don't allow the fear and ego to barge into your life and take over. Make sure that God is present in your life every single day. and you will love it. That is my promise. That is what I experienced. I know that many of you experienced that too. Just stick to Him. If He takes a vacation, take a vacation with Him. But stick to Him no matter what. Amen.